To give you a bit of an introduction, I'm Nat, and I am the head of community at Exceptional Individuals. And we are a social enterprise that supports people who are neurodiverse. But we were doing these every single week last year. And we've always been doing these webinars, but we wanted to pilot it. And this year, we have got the whole year planned out. I wanted to wait till February so we had enough time to market them, to create the content, but really excited because we've got some really interesting subjects which are highly researched. The amount of papers and books that were read for this one was a lot. So I'm really glad that I was able to put the extra time and effort for it. Oh, and we've got, oh yes, Carol, Cambridge, diagnosis of Asperger's and dyslexia in my 50s. Great to have you again, Carol. And April says, in London, staying at my parents' house in Newport, Wales, while the water supply issues on the block of flats is being sorted. I hope it gets sorted soon. I have autism and I'm interested in hearing about that part of Asperger's history. And Sonia, not Asperger's, but borderline. Great. And a quick little, I guess, disclosure. I'm really bad at pronouncing words. So if I go between Asperger's to Asperge, just let me go on that one. So we typically support those with dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, and ADHD, but really the whole spectrum of being neurodiverse, which could be anything from dyscalculic, dysgraphic, Tourette's, OCD, even parts of anxiety, which kind of all overlap. But today we're going to be having a deep dive into autism and Asperger's in particular, and the person who it got the name from. Oh, nice. Melissa's from Italy. So a quick thing on what do we do? Well, hopefully a few of you know already, but this is your first time for joining, welcome. So we help with recruitment of neurodiverse individuals, training, workshops, consultancy. Essentially, we're an A to Z of anything neurodiversity when it comes to adults and finding work, getting into work and keeping work, and supporting organizations more inclusive. But our great selling point is we are neurodiverse. 80% of our team are on the spectrum. I myself am dyslexic, dyspraxic, and diagnosed on the autistic spectrum. And I think what makes this really interesting for me is that, I would have been diagnosed as Asperger's, but just because of the person who did it kind of diagnosed me as high functioning, which kind of overlaps. But nowadays we would just diagnose someone as ASD, autism spectrum disorder. But there's still a lot of people who resonate with being Asperger's. Oh yes, Anya, got some great names. Berlin, Germany, really interesting. Oh, okay, Angela, you've got to really excuse me on my pronunciations today. Nice. So a controversial history of Hans Asperger's. Now, controversial just means it's going to ruffle a few feathers because it's not completely agreed upon. However, in recent years, a bunch of new evidence, I think 2019, a lot of it, there was a lot of new evidence that came into the public eye on his history. Up until recently, Hans has been seen as a top bloke who has done massive amounts for autism. Now, he definitely has done a lot for autism. That's undeniable. But should we put him on a pedestal that he has been in the past? Well, that'll be up to you individually. But I'm going to tell you a few facts, and then maybe we can come to some sort of understanding ourselves. So a quick history of autism, and this is just a real quick one. In 1911 is not when autism was first became a thing. It's always been a thing, but this is when it was first recognized. However, the name autism mainly referred to schizophrenia, so it's not the autism we know today. Then in the 20s, people with autism were treated with electroconvulsive therapy. So you were zapped. Think of things like A Clockwork Orange or Once Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where they're just strapping you and they just zap that autism out of you. Obviously, we know you can't do that. And this is something which is barbaric today, but was a thing. In the 40s, Cranach Kramer stated that autism was a social emotional disorder. This is normally what we call the person we call the father of autism, who was the first person to coin it. Or was he? There's a little bit of debate because Asperger did start doing his articles in like exactly the same time, but because he was Austrian, and there was like wars and that, nobody bothered translating his papers. And then he kind of fell under the radar. But it's really interesting that two people supposedly did the research separate from each other at the exact same time. Obviously, there is debate whether or not one stole from the other. Maybe we aren't ever going to know. Then in the 50s, people were like, oh, you know what? Autism, maybe it's a parent's fault. It's because you never hugged your child. It's because you never showed any love, which was incredibly damaging. And a lot of the negative animosity and stereotypes that we now contribute to autism weren't originally there. You know, even back in the 20s, autism was seen as a gift in some circles, but it's around the 50s when it took a bit of a dive, the reputation. Then we're like, you know what? This electrocognitive like zapping therapy isn't working. Maybe we will put some LSD in the system. And LSD was actually used to treat autism. Then we move into the 70s and they eased up a bit, still using shock therapy. And they were using things like, okay, if you're like, they'd punish you if you did something wrong, reward you if you did something good. And that is still kind of done today, but not in as extreme a way. Then we also had auditory integration training, which is slowly exposing someone to different sounds and stimuli to kind of lower their sensitivity, which is starting to be the beginning of like a more holistic approach, which I think is really interesting. And then only in the 70s, we were able to really determine that there is a genetic link to autism. It's not caused through lack of hugging. It's something which is part of your DNA. And in terms of when it comes to neurodiversity, it's just a different way of processing the world, not a disability. Now, again, you might argue with that, but this is, like I said, a controversial history, and that's the one we're going with. Angela says, what about Lorna Wing? We are going to definitely bring Lorna Wing up, so do not worry. This is just a really quick overview of some of the more, interesting kind of histories, but I have not forgot about her. Tim says, most theories, discoveries, and inventions are disputed across several people across the same time. Yeah, so take everything with a pinch of salt, but all of this can be referenced. I want to start off by asking all of you a question. What do you know about Hans Asperger's? So anything you know, or anything you think you know? Maybe you know nothing, maybe you know a lot of information, but it would be really great to find what people's current thoughts and opinions are on this interesting, to say the least, figure in autism history. And April has very kindly said there is a more in-depth webinar on the history of autism on our EI channel. Yes, there is. So we'll definitely check that out. Okay, nothing, very little. You two are going to be very easy to please, which is great today. He observed the way children interacted to coin the term Asperger's syndrome. That's actually not technically correct. And I will go on to that. So Lorna Wing, which Angela rightly mentioned, she coined the term Asperger's syndrome, but she coined it due to the research that Hans did prior. Nothing other than the fact that he coined Asperger's syndrome. So already we've got some great false information out there. Doctor Who worked in Germany, separating people who were of value. Oh, yeah, true. Scan, Munch. Okay, he was an Australian psychiatrist. He assessed children. Not much, only recent commentary regarding Nazi themes. Interesting. Frida says, I read there was a Russian female Doctor Who discovered AS before Asperger, and he translated her work from Russian. We don't know. That's the thing. I've heard that too. We don't know. And he worked with Nazis. Now, we are going to be talking a lot about Nazis today. The key question is, was he a Nazi? And hopefully we will have an answer by the end of today, or the end of this hour. So in a nutshell, Asperger's was an Austrian doctor, And not just an Austrian doctor, he was also a Catholic, which is going to be really important as we go through today. Just a bit of a history for you. World War II, really oversimplified, but Nazi Germany and Hitler didn't like Jews, but they also didn't like other religions. However, they were like they were Christian, but they didn't like the Catholic variety. But they weren't like dead against it. So already he's not like your perfect ideal Nazi supporter. Then he's also among the first to describe autism. He may have not called it autism, but he was the first to describe it. In fact, he called us autism sociopaths, and he used very not nice language, and also linked with Nazis that did kill children. So it is 100% a fact that he was linked with organizations that murdered children. But the question we're really going to be diving in deep today was, did he kill children? Because I know, we all know someone who's done something bad in the past, but knowing someone who's done something bad to actually killing a child, totally different ball game. And this is what the research hopes to dive in deep for. And just, the research I got today came from the Journal of Autism. I can't pronounce that word, but you can read it for yourself. Molecular. I'll come back to that. Now, Asperger's refer children to a clinic called Steingart in Vienna. I told you I'd be bad at pronunciation. And this was a clinic/murder facility that killed nearly 800 children. They were experimented on, they were killed. Officially, they died of influenza, which wasn't true. They were given things that would test on them, experiment, killed. They even have 800 brains in their kind of basement where they use for science studies. This was a horrific place, and people knew it. This wasn't a secret. People knew that this place was a bad place. You check in there, you do not check out. And Asperger's knew this. And to say that when he referred people there, he knew he was referring them to his death. So this is something that we know. But officially, there's only 2 official reports where he has signed John Hancock, his signature, which led to the death of people. Now, 2 is not a big number, but it's too many. And that's not counting all the other people, because he was the head honcho, and he would get other people to sign it on his behalf, and then they would go off to their death. So depending on how much accountability you put on to someone signing their name, to someone acting on someone else's behalf, you tell me. But already, it's not looking great for him in terms of the history records. Now that we know that already he's 100% got blood on his hands, should Asperger's syndrome be removed completely? And I know what you're saying, Nat, it is already removed. Yes, officially, when it comes to diagnosing new individuals, we call it ASD, autism spectrum condition. But there's still many people who use the term Asperger's proudly. So is this something we should chuck out? Is it something that we should keep? Or is there something in between? This is a difficult question, okay? And there's no answer to this. So we've got yes, okay, one of you thinks we should remove it, one of you thinks we should not, and a lot of you do not know. And I think, to be honest, this is where a lot of us lie. Okay, why do we remove it? Well, why do we want to honor someone who was a baby murderer? We do not. But has this name evolved? Has it become something more than the person it was named after? And also, remember, this isn't his syndrome. It was named in honor of him. So Lorna Wing actually created it. So Tim says, if it's what you were told that you had, then it may feel off if someone tries to take it away from you. It's true. Fred says it is what it is. People will use it. Yeah. And I don't know, how do you go against that problematic history? It is not for me to say today, but it's definitely an interesting question, which I think the more you know, the more of an informed decision you're able to make. So on here, I just want to get your honest opinions. It's completely anonymous, but you can slide left if you totally disagree, or slide right if you totally disagree. And the questions are, we should erase his work in understanding autism. He wasn't a great person. Let's get rid of all his work. Naming something after someone is an honor of the person. So just because it was named after him, does that mean we are honoring him? And the last one, naming something after someone is simply an historical recognition of the work that they did. So just let me know, where do you sit on this scale? Oh, Sanjan, great to have you. It's okay for the history books and medical journals, but ASD is more descriptive on a condition. Interesting. Jenny says less stigma than autism. Oh, Sonia says it's like Bikram yoga. Is that like the new Netflix series? I would be meaning to watch that. They changed the name and with time, the legacy will go on. It is true. Give it a couple of decades and we won't probably know that name very more. So let's have a look at the results. We should erase his work in understanding autism. A lot of people disagree. Oh, I put the tick and the cross back to front. Excuse that. Yeah, no, I agree. You know, no one is a saint. And if we chucked away all the good things that someone has done just because of a bad thing, then, you know, it's not going well. The only difference is what he did was really bad. I was researching about Einstein today. You know, everyone loves Einstein. He was a bit of a jerk to his children. And John Lennon, another great neurodiverse individual, a jerk to his children. But does that kind of counteract all the piecework? I don't know. Then we got naming something after someone is a honor of the person. I see at the moment we're a bit split at this. I think it is an honor, but is it an honor of the person or is it in recognition of what they did? Because Lorna Wing, who coined the term Asperger syndrome, she wasn't naming it after him. She was naming it after the research that he did. And a lot of his research was great because he talked a lot about the side of autism, which we understand to be Asperger's or conventionally high functioning. What it didn't go on to say, though, is what he thought of the other side of the spectrum. And that's where it gets nasty, to be honest. Not great. And what we've got, I would rather, okay, Joe says, I'd rather it was replaced. It lets those with autism avoid having to say autism. That is another good point as well. And people like that because of the stigma. So now we're getting on to this person called Lana Wing, who I've spoken a lot about. So she is the person who coined the term. She, 1981, when Wing found Asperger's 1944 works. That was a long time, from the 40s to the 80s, where all this work was just not covered. She found it, was like, woohoo, the gold mine. And then she did it all and it worked with her. And then she started to use the term. Now, this woman, she sadly passed away, I think, 2014, I want to say. You know, don't quote me on that, but she was a phenomenal woman, and she even supported in the creation of the National Autism Society and did amazing work. But she only had half the information, so she was no by means a supporter of what we now know to be true about Asperger's. Though in 1992 it was included in the DSM, that's like the Bible of Diagnostic, but in 2019 it was removed from both the ICD and the DSM. So basically both the Bibles, which we use to know what is an official term, have now got rid of it and changed it to ASD. Why? Not because of the Nazi links, but because a lot of people with Asperger's were not getting the support they needed because they didn't have the name of autism. So it was just easier to consolidate it, and it made it a lot easier to get the support that people needed. William says, I think people should be able to self-identify however they please, but I wouldn't be surprised if Jewish, Romanian, etc. Holocaust target groups found it particularly unpleasant to be associated with someone so aligned with the Nazis. That's a really good point. And Harris says, a lot of context, I would 100% back self-identifying, but what about when it's identify harms people? it's a good point, actually. Like, okay, use whatever term you like best, but if it hurts other people, it's difficult, isn't it? Freedom of speech, but also not be a jerk. Now, I want to know from all of your personal perspectives, do you still resonate with the term Asperger's, Aspie, or if you aren't autistic, do you use the term? And it'd be keen to know, I just want to get a feel of the room, to be honest, on how used is it? And I would imagine it's fairly used within this demographic, because as we know, it's only since 2000, not very recently, have it stopped being diagnosed officially. So you're probably not even here if you were diagnosed with the current definition. So we've got someone, I still use the term. I mean, for me, I was never officially diagnosed with it, but I'm diagnosed with something which is also considered politically incorrect these days, high functioning, and it does kind of create a bit of a torn in your identity. Joe says, someone told me that it separates people of their value to society. And that's a really good point, because being Asperger's is a bit trendy. It's like, oh, you're a secret genius. But having autism, sometimes think, oh, it means what you can't do. So unfortunately, there is different kind of feelings attached. We've got, no, I was diagnosed late and very much remember it being used as a slur during high school years. I love the idea of the spectrum instead. It's much more reality. No, absolutely hate it. I cringe when I see it and it makes me uncomfortable. The connection with Nazi eugenics is too high, and it's also a functioning label, which isn't how autism works. I call myself autistic. No, not personally, unless someone specifies it. No, I use autism, but I find both terms have negative stigma. I was diagnosed with Asperger's, but use autistic as I don't know a lot about it, and use autistic because I find it more simple. Really, do you know, that's really interesting. I was expecting it to be a lot more one-sided on using it. But it's interesting how some of you have said, even though you might have been diagnosed with it, you now have shifted to another term. Frida says, I just say I'm a bit strange. You know what? That can work as well. But I do like, for me, I prefer the word different just because it doesn't have negative connotations. But honestly, whatever works for you. I don't think anyone's here to say what you should or shouldn't identify as. Okay, personally, I'm not keen on the term Aspie. When I was 14, I thought I was Asperger syndrome, even though I was officially diagnosed with ASD 10 years prior. Interesting. So now that we know the past, we know how Lorna got to this, and she's like, okay, I'm going to call it Asperger syndrome because I found his work and I'm a top person. I'm going to make sure that this person's work isn't forgotten. So she is not doing any plagiarism. Good on her. But now let's fix history, because we now know what we thought we knew, we now know to be incorrect. And I want to just ask this question from what you currently know, from what you already thought. For those of you who knew that Asperger's was linked to the Nazi Party, was he an actual member of the Nazi Party? And after today, I will actually be able to prove it definitively, but I just want to know what you currently believe to be true. Okay, so we've actually got quite a mix here. We've got yes, we've got no clue. And was he a member of the Nazi? Oh, 50-50. I'm on the edge of my seat, literally. You need an uncertain. Okay. Drum roll. No, he was not a member of the Nazi Party, with a little asterisk. So, okay, was he officially part of the Nationalist Party? No, he did not want to be a Nazi, not because he completely disagreed with their views, but because he was a Catholic and it just, didn't align with him. He was just like, no. However, he was a member of a lot, and I mean a lot, of affiliated groups. So think, they're not official Nazis, but they're all groups that have Nazi values, Nazi ideals. His best friends were Nazis. So yeah, officially not a Nazi, but a Nazi sympathizer, I think it's fair to say yes. it gets a bit blurry because, how can you truly say what someone internally thinks? Were they doing it just for the appearance, or were they doing it because they genuinely believed it? And I think the argument goes that yes, maybe joining one or two groups affiliated might kind of make you look like you're part of the team and you're not going to get killed. But he joined a lot of these groups and he attended them quite regularly. So this is when it becomes like, maybe he didn't want to be like full-fledged Nazi, but he definitely wanted to be part of the in crowd. Sanjan says most Austrians were encouraged to join Nazi party, but some did work alongside members. And immediately, a lot of his colleagues were Jewish, and they were encouraged. And to be in his defense, he did say no. And a lot of people, there was a lot of pressure to join. So he actually made quite a bold move by not joining. So I don't want to sound like I'm completely biased and one-sided. He did not join, and that was a big decision at the time. Okay, Harris says a good thing. As we say in Germany, if there's a Nazi at the table and 10 other people sitting there talking to him, you've got a table of 11 Nazis. So guilty by association? Yeah, Michaela, got that. Scientists took opportunities for research by taking Nazi money. So yeah, just to set the history records correct, if someone says Hans Asperger was a Nazi, no, he was not. But a correct way of saying it was Nazi ideals, Nazi sympathizer, or compliant to Nazi values. I think that is the more politically correct way and factually correct way of saying it. The next thing I want to bring up is there's this kind of like myth or legend almost that Asperger was a bit of a hero. You know what? He kind of went undercover, like incognito, to save children. He played the game. Yes, a couple of people died on his watch, but he saved a lot more people than what were killed. And this is something which a lot of people quote and say, it was part of the times, you kind of had to be a sympathizer. You had to be kind of aligned with the values, otherwise he would have been killed. But he did what he could when he could to help people. So this is all new to me. Okay, now interesting. Yes, no, but he tried, no. And this is another myth bust, which I can firmly kind of correct. We know for a fact that his name signed off death warrants for people on the autistic spectrum. We know that is a fact, okay? But did he save anyone? We cannot say. There is no evidence to suggest that he saved anyone. Sometimes he referred a few people who he considered his little geniuses, people who were more able or more capable, in his words, to go on to other things and more research. But those who did not meet his ideal, those who he saw as not very valuable, he did get rid of. So, no, he didn't save anyone. I mean, maybe he did, but there's no evidence to suggest he saved anyone. So you cannot say definitively, but there's nothing to back up that this guy wore a cape and saved people when the Nazis weren't looking. Sorry. Okay, now another thing which isn't going to look good. So Franz Hamburger does make me feel a bit hungry now, but this guy was an actual bona fide legit Nazi. He was the mentor of Hans Asperger's. So he was the top dog at the time. He was like running the ship. People knew him. He was a well-known figure, very influential. And he was a Nazi, but the point I'm making, he was best friends essentially with Hans Asperger's. And even once the war had finished and all the Nazis were locked up, Hans actually got away with it because he wasn't officially part of the Nazi party, which meant he wasn't culpable of those atrocities. This guy didn't fare so well. But even after the war, Hans Asperger's talked about him with great admiration, calling him like a role model, a mentor, great research. And this is important to know who your friends are, because it means that you are okay with their values. You are okay with what they believe, what their views are on the whole. And it also meant that because he had friends in high places, he was able to rise up the ranks a lot faster. So all his colleagues were Jewish, by the way, well, a lot of them. Guess what? They suddenly disappeared. So he was only like 27 or 28. He was like in his young 20s, and he suddenly rose up the ranks. So because of the war and, the whole Holocaust, he benefited from. I'm not saying he was for it. We don't know, but we do know he benefited from it. And we also know for a fact that the Nazis, because they would do assessments on people to find out like how reliable are they? And Hans was described as being a safe pair of hands. He was someone that the Nazis could trust. They didn't like the fact that he wasn't a Nazi member, and they also didn't like the fact that he was Catholic, but they considered him a guy they could trust. And that's something we know. This is all news to me. Angela says, according to today's criteria, Hans would be Asperger's autistic. There is debate over that on whether or not he would be or would not, but it's definitely interesting to think about. So moving on from Nazi friends, we're going to think now that what do we now know to be different? And how did we even find out all this new information? So here's a picture of him with some of his buddies. Some are Jewish, some are not in this place. This is still early days. But all this information that Hans kind of wrote, we just thought got destroyed, bombed, and kind of exploded from the clinic in Vienna. But it wasn't blown up. It was actually an archive. So when troops bombed the children's clinic and his work was thought to be destroyed, in 2009, so not that long ago, professionals were still remembering with honor Asperger's life till the discovery came to light. So when we're thinking about Lorna Wing, who was naming the syndrome after him, she honestly had no idea, because this was a lot later. 2009, we started to find out all this categoric 100%, as 100% as you can get, evidence that of his problematic views, opinions, and past. So this is why when people say, well, didn't we already know this? No, we did not. It's only fairly recently that this information has come to light. Yes, these sessions are so intriguing and give me more info to look into. Yes, that's what I like. I'm so glad to be doing these again. All right, so what do the record books actually say? What were on all these really interesting documents? Asperger was loyal to the Nazis, but not a member. People liked him. He was popular in the Nazi ranks. People thought, this is a guy who we can rely on. They also know that he willingly gave his medical records. So when they come up to him, say, okay, we want to see your records. Can we have them? He did not put up a fight. And this was a big deal, because if people, didn't match the right criteria, they would be sent off to their death. So interestingly, again, he may not have signed the death warrant on all of them, but he did give the evidence to the people who then would go off and kill them. And he would have been aware of this. Involvement in the Nazi program that killed children. So the whole program about eugenics and killing children was created by his mentor, Hamburger. So, and you're still friends with him. This is just like Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein, you're still friends with the fella. You can't say you're not innocent, not guilty. Sorry, maybe that was a bad analogy. Apologies for that. Asperger describes the children with autism as being opposed to Nazi values. So he would actually write whether or not, okay, is this person going to be trouble for us? Yes or no? Okay, Patricia, thanks. I'll say accept that. So now that, Asperger has said things like opposed to Nazi values, and he seemed quite stern, I want to know, do you think for the time, not then, not today, but for the time, do you think his views and opinions were regressive, so really kind of conservative and more Nazi aligned, or do you think they were quite progressive, so he was speaking ahead of his time, more of an innovator? Because this is something which we often think when people say, oh, this person did a bad thing. Well, in the time, it was kind of okay. And I don't always know about that. Yeah, yeah, it's as if you don't know what your friend is doing. I agree. And I see mostly it's kind of a bit mixed. A lot of people thought he was a very progressive, innovative individual. He was not. He was a jerk. Even then, his colleagues would talk, quite openly about the benefits, some of the strengths of people, but he was always quite a hardline individual. And we can prove that by looking at the work he did to the work that his colleagues did to give you the type of idea of the character and where he was in the context of his time. So I think it is important to judge people in the period where they were operated in, but you can only really do that if you've got something to compare it to. You can't compare it to today, so you need to compare it to a peer. So this is a colleague. A colleague, we're talking about children, one of Asperger's ones, and he says, oh yeah, very well developed in every aspect, very positive. Obviously, this is just a snippet, but generally, they weren't kind of condemning. Yet Asperger, on the other hand, speaking about the same person, said, very difficult, psychopathic boy of a kind which is not frequent amongst small children. He speaks of it on a very cold, very unempathetic way. This is not the guy you want to be looking after your children. And this is an actual picture of one of the victims who sadly died at 3. Patricia says, too often people are taken out of historical context. Yeah, I totally agree. And that's why I think it is important to at least understand the person from their time. Now, I want to tell you a quick story of Hetta Skrenberg. Sorry, I'll call her Hetta, one of Asperger's patients. She was a small girl, I think only 3 years old, and she had seizures, schizophrenia, was very difficult when it was like interacting with people. She had some mental health conditions, we know that. But then Asperger's would like view it, and on the report form said, okay, this person must be an absolute nightmare to live with, and got this person killed. This child was only 3 and was killed because it didn't really see it having a future or any values. Evidence we have to back this up is this letter. Asperger's wrote that Hetta must be an unbearable burden on her mother. Like, dude, that language isn't nice. And remember, this wasn't typical language of the time. So you can't say, oh, in context. No, this was how the person spoke. And worse than that, in my opinion, is a note from Hetta's mother. And the mother was aware that her daughter would be killed. This is where it gets really complicated. Was she okay with the fact that her daughter was going to get killed because she was brainwashed? Was she okay because she genuinely believed that her daughter would be better off dead? Or she just did not like her daughter? We also know, though, that she didn't tell her husband because she knew the husband would be upset. But essentially, the mother wrote to Asperger's and said, can you get rid of her? Like, I agree with what you're saying. Do something about it. So it gives you an idea of like the sign of the times. It actually makes me feel a bit physically sick, to be honest. Okay, says, right, should have looked more in Nazis instead of children. Oh, God, sorry, all I see sad faces. But it really is bad that the mother killed her, essentially, and Hans Asperger's, and the dad didn't know. Okay, moving sharply on, hopefully to things not as bad, but yeah, things are going to get worse before they get better. In 1941, Hetta was sent to a secret organization responsible for the child euthanasia program. So it was, you know what? Did people know about it? No, like I think the Nazis knew that killing children is not a great policy. It's not going to win you any votes, so it was done in secret, but I think people knew. So they kind of go off in the night, like the nurses knew. Oh, and another horrible thing is nurses would get paid commission for sending children because they knew killing children was not going to be a popular thing. So if they kind of helped along with that, they got paid per person, which is really disgusting. But everyone knew that you weren't coming back from this. So a question I want to ask all of you, did Asperger just allow things to happen without reacting, or is he more responsible? Because again, he never physically killed anyone, but how responsible do you think this person is? Okay, which is, yes, I have a lot of problems with that man. He's basically the reason I didn't pass AQ10. Oh, sorry. This is so shocking, but it's weird how interesting I'm finding this. No, it's not weird at all. Autistic people tend to be more interested in dark subjects. That would explain why I'm interested in true crime. Okay, so we've got seems to be more complicit than a passive bystander. Yeah, I'd say that. Responsible, he had to sign off on it. Responsible, absolutely responsible, responsible. Energetics was the belief of the era. See, again, it wasn't. Some people, you could say no, but then you would be killed. It's one of those questions which is very difficult. It's more a personal opinion. On my side, I think we'll never know what he truly thought, but he 100% could have done more. Rather than give, sometimes he actively supported their language. Like he used terms like Hell Hitler in like letters, which was optional, by the way. You didn't have to do that. So he did go above and beyond in helping the Nazis, even though he wasn't completely aligned with their views. Like he didn't believe everything they did, but he was very much a careerist and an opportunist. He rose dramatically through the ranks, remember, as a result. So he did benefit from the regime. Even after the war, when all his friends went to jail or killed, he still carried on. How did his writing change over the time? And this is important to the point I made about how he developed, how he rose through the ranks. So if he wasn't a Nazi at the beginning, maybe towards the end, maybe he became one, but that's up to you. Well, not up to anyone really, is it? So in 1937, before the war, he basically never really talked about autism. He kept it quiet. He was very scientific. 38, he mentioned autistics as a very characterized group, so very defined. Again, quite normal. 1941, abnormal children. Now we're using some negative terminology, so it is changing. And by 1944, he says they are outside the greater organism of the Nazi ideal. And you might think, oh, he's being very kind of like, careful with his language. No, that language is enough to get someone killed. So he definitely changed and got more extreme over time. Why do you think, though, that he made this change? Did he believe it? Did he get more behind the Nazis? Do you think there was a different motive, if at all any, of why he may have changed this writing style? They would be out the greater organism. Sometimes they didn't follow orders well. They don't like dishonesty. Yeah, no, be honest, autistics would not have made good Nazis, which I'm grateful for. But, okay, you think some people think he was sucking up. Some people say he was in fear, survival, media hate speech, could hide, found support. And these are all really good. So I think definitely it could have been survival, definitely. But I do think he went a little bit, it's hard to say, to be honest, why he changed his speech. It could be maybe he really believed it. It also could be that he was sucking up or he just didn't want to get killed. So again, there's not a definitive answer on this one. Says he found a way to hide his terrible crimes with the Nazi world. Yeah. Now, just to summarize what we spoke about, as well as that report I mentioned from molecular science, I also got a lot of this information from Asperger's Children by Edith Sarah. Well, anyway, you can see the book here. And I read it all for this webinar. It was a beast, but honestly, absolutely fascinating and really dark. I'd say, though, the book isn't so much on Asperger as it is about the kind of the hospital space at the time, like being in Vienna at that time, being a doctor or in the medical profession. Really interesting, though. But just to quick summarize, what did we actually learn today? We knew that for a fact, Asperger benefited from the war. his career went up the ranks. He was one of the youngest people in his field at the time, and his Jewish fellows were removed. So he did benefit from other people's downfalls. We know that. We also know that there's no evidence he saved anyone. That doesn't mean he didn't, but there's no evidence. We also know that after World War II, he called himself as a resistor of Nazi belief systems, calling them totally humane. So this is in his own words, but then again, now that the trouble has blown over, is he just saying this because, want to be on the right side of history? We can't say, but it definitely seems suspicious how we noticed that as the war was intensifying, his language got more extreme, and then when it dissipated, it suddenly kind of eased up. I'm not trying to put thoughts in any of your heads, but it's definitely something which is worth thinking and considering. Sounds like he played the game to suit himself. To be honest, Sanjan, it does sound like that, and he does sound like a hypocrite. But, it's hard to say without the person being alive. So the final thoughts from all of you, from what you heard today, what are your current views on these subjects? Okay, final thoughts. His research is still essential in autism. Vast majority, some of you, that's changing. So some of you think his isn't essential. I think it was a good starting point, and that research has been really invaluable, but obviously it's outdated now, but we wouldn't be where we are today without it. So the truth is, his research has been helpful. Yes, it did result in other people dying, but it did still have a significant impact that we still use today. People should stop using Asperger's. Strongly, more of you agree than I would imagine for that. I think it's a personal choice, honestly, whatever works for you. I think you should at least understand the history, but if you want to reclaim the word, or if you think the word has a meaning beyond the person, I can get behind that and understand it. If we didn't use his research, would this disregard his research? No, I don't think so. Keeping the name helps us remember the past. It's a true point, actually, because we get rid of the term completely. All those people who lost their lives in the name of supporting us with where we are today in autism research would be forgotten. The term has been reclaimed by the community. So interestingly, less of you agree with that than I would have thought. So you think the negative connotations attached to it far outweigh any positives that we've been able to reclaim. Really interesting, and I think everyone is going to have their personal opinions, but great. And just to end on, I always like to mention, if any of you was like, you know what, I have autism and I'm struggling at work, get in contact, because that's what we do at Exceptional Individuals. I always mention this at the end, but we do deliver workplace needs assessments. This is just something we do to help benefit the community and encourage extra learning. But I just want to say, with the last few minutes we have, if you have any questions, anything that you want clarification on, maybe you just want to make a point or a statement, say your piece now, and I'll do my best to answer them. Okay, Michaela says, I'm going to stop using it from now on. And you know what? That's completely fine. But I do think if you choose to use it, that's also fine. I think we need an alternative word other than high functioning, as that's problematic too. I think what we start to use exceptional individuals is higher support needs or lower support needs. But you're right, I still think we need to find a better word. Marie says, I really like the Neurodiversity logo. I prefer it above Aspire/ADSD. Do you mean like kind of the infinity symbol? Patricia says, who would I get in contact with as I'm struggling at work? What is high functioning exactly? Essentially, it just means that, or you can hide, you can mask. The average person wouldn't know you're autistic. You can actually go about day-to-day life without it being a big issue, but it is still something that affects you. Unfortunately, it is a very outdated term though, so I wouldn't use that. It's good to know what it means, but also it's not great practice to use it. No, sorry about this. I'm really bad at I'm very dyslexic. So if I pronounce any of your names wrong, really apologize. And just to let you know, if you enjoy today, we are doing these every single week for the year. And I'm so excited in order to be able to deliver them. The next one is on the science of reading. So we're going to be talking about how does the brain actually read? And obviously it's going to be based around dyslexia, but really interesting and some really great research. Now, last year, all our webinars were completely free, and they are still completely free if you are neurodiverse and job seeking. But if you are in a position to do so, we also have an option now where you can donate. And if you're a working professional, we also ask that you're able to contribute. This is just to help keep it running, but our sessions are still absolutely open to everyone, and hopefully they're accessible and you've enjoyed today. But if you thought, you know what, Nat, I like what you said about getting help in the workplace, all you need to do is contact us at exceptionalindividuals.com. My name's been Nat, N-A-T, and you can just email me at nat@accept.co.uk if you'd like, and we can go from there. But thank you so much for joining today. I've really enjoyed researching this one, and it's been great to have such an interactive audience. All right, I'm going to go now and let you all have a great day, but thank you for your comments, and I'll hopefully see you next week. Bye all.